In action on Saturday in the Premier League, Manchester City begin the weekend's football when they host Newcastle in the early game before Arsenal play Bournemouth. There's also Aston Villa against Crystal Palace, Brighton v...
A long time, so always you think maybe you need time, but yeah, they make an exceptional recruitment, experienced players, exactly what they need, and with a manager with a huge quality in many things. And yeah, I would say maybe it was a surprise, but it's not a surprise anymore. So I think they will stay there.
I think it's a different game because they're in a different moment, we're in a different moment. That was right at the start of the season. This is now crammed into the middle. But I don't think the principles ever change. I think we're going to need to be very good defensively in this game. We're also going to need to be very good with the ball. We're going to need to pose a threat in the game. I believe we can be and can do that. But certainly we're going to need to get our foundation.
Context of that, Eddie Howe talking about that 3-3 thriller at St James's Park. It was one of the games of the season because it was, do you remember, Newcastle 3-1 up at one stage, Karen, and then, you know, when City had got it back to 3-3, they probably should have won it as well. It was a crazy match.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I don't remember it as well as I probably should do, but I certainly was shocked kind of by both teams' performances in terms of like the amount of goals, the quality of the goals that they were conceding and scoring. But yeah, I think, you know, looking forward to tomorrow, it's going to be an exciting game. And I think that was certainly for me a day that, you know, Haaland really put his name to what he was going to do, his imprint onto the Premier League.
Let's start with Manchester City though, Jules. I mean, where are they? Because I think it's fair to say, look, as a City fan as well, they have not been firing on all cylinders. Why do you...
The World Cup in between with so many players going on international duty at the World Cup, I think was a disturbance in a way. I think they've had the Erling Haaland's gem to incorporate in a team that was working really well without a proper out-and-out striker. And I think for him, he also had to adapt to the new environment, the new team. He's done extremely well. And I don't buy at all the debate on like, oh, would it be better without him, this and that. If you've got a striker that scores already 27 goals, you are a better team with him and he's an amazing player for you. But he could get even better, of course he could. But I think they still have done well. We said it the other day. I think they're still in the Champions League and they have a chance to go to the quarterfinals. They are still in the FA Cup. And the league, they're second behind an amazing Arsenal team that have overachieved really so far this season. So they can still win 3 trophies, including the Champions League. So it can't be that bad of a season.
They can still do it, but Karen, do you believe that in terms of, do you get the feeling that City could go on a run? We're so used to seeing them go and like win 16 games on the trot.
They've done it before. You know, they've blown teams out of the water in terms of the league, and they've pipped it at the end as well. So you know, they've got the experience, they've got the resilience. We've seen them do it, and I certainly think now the pressure is all on Arsenal, you know, in terms of maintaining their performances. And essentially, like, City are quite happy being in the position I think they're in. There's no pressure on them in terms of, like, leading the way. And they're quite happy to just, like, slowly nibble away at the lead of Arsenal. But I think ultimately what it comes down to is, like, can they put the consistent performances week in and week out? And that's something that we've not necessarily seen of late, you know, like, is Bernardo Silva going to be coming on the inside? Is he going to be playing, you know, that left back space, or is he going to, you know, what is that going to look like? They've really suffered, I think, personally for me. Like, I think when Stones came in and then he was out injured, I thought they were kind of growing in terms of their confidence. Like, Akanji's come in and then he's come out, you know. So Ruben Diaz being back, I think, solidified things defensively.
Saying all those names, they're still world-class players.
And this is what I mean. Like, it's amazing. And yeah, the whole debate around Haaland, like, being the issue, I just think is absolutely ridiculous.
Go on, quickly on that, though. Because everyone seems to have a different opinion on it. Where do you sit?
Well, I mean,
scored 27 Premier League goals. How can he be a problem?
I think exactly. I think overall, like, the service is something that maybe City aren't used to having an out-and-out striker. You know, they're looking at constantly building through the midfield, finding those overloads, and it's like building those partnerships and the relationships. You know, with the likes of Mahrez, Grealish, how they work together. You know, where does Bernardo Silva sit in terms of the supporting role as well, or Gundogan, De Bruyne? How does he complement? You know, where are the runs coming through in the midfield to complement his movements as well? So I think, yeah, there's a lot of things. And there's a lot of tumultuousness around the game.
You talk about those runs. I was just going to interrupt you there because I was just thinking, Alan Shearer, right, has said recently that he needs to go into the dressing room and ruffle all the feathers and say, look, I want these balls quicker. I'm Erling Haaland. He needs to be more. And he said he did that once upon a time with Ginola.
Yeah,
Is that the kind of conversation you think he needs to have with his team?
I think they're having it. I mean, I don't know exactly the secret within that dressing room and with Guardiola, but I'm sure this is the discussion that they have. And because it would benefit City if sometimes the ball was getting quicker to Haaland, or if they were picking those runs that you mentioned. And sometimes we see, recently I was at the Spurs game, for example, where him and Alvarez, the two of them, were trying to run in behind a bit, but the ball was always going a bit wide, and then let's keep building up and the position play, all of that, which I think must be frustrating for Haaland. But this is also part of the City identity. And you don't want to change that because he's been very successful and he will keep being successful. So it's just finding the balance really between playing for Haaland and having Haaland playing for your team, which his job is not to touch the ball 70 times a game, is to score the chances that will be created for him, whatever way they are creating for him.
I think it's fascinating really when you think about how Jack Grealish's role has kind of changed when he was at Villa, now he's at City, and how he's kind of said that he doesn't necessarily want it to be fast. You know, he wants that slow, deliberate build-up, you know, in terms of getting the ball out wide, bringing some players to come overload, and then, you know, shift the opposition as well. You know, and sometimes I think maybe why Phil Foden hasn't necessarily been playing as much is because he's so keen to like go forward, and that's not exactly what Pep is looking to do. So it's essentially, you know, he's at the helm. You have to play how he wants. Yeah. And, you know.
But we say that with Phil Foden in the last two games. I mean, they put 4 past Bournemouth.
Oh, he's been unreal. Don't get me wrong.
Like, yeah, and then 3 against Bristol City. And that Foden on the right-hand side has worked for City, right?
But that means Mahrez on the bench. But Mahrez has been so good this season, you know, so behind Haaland in terms of goal scoring and even creating. So between Grealish, Foden and Mahrez, now that Foden is really back into his best form, really, and even Bernardo can play anywhere. That's how good he is.
It's a good problem to have, isn't it, really?
Exactly. You just have to pick what combination is best, depending on maybe who you play against.
How important is this game for Newcastle as well? Because in years gone by, Newcastle going to the Etihad, it was a bit of a free hit. They could write it off, right? They've got those 2 games in hand, as we saw in the table, and they have got their eyes on the Champions League. But to get over the League Cup disappointment, they need to do that quickly, right?
Yeah, I think that's going to be really hard. And I think kind of they're in a funny place at the minute in terms of momentum, you know, in terms of finding their flow and their rhythm.
What's that like, Karen, if you lose a trophy? And
then,
you know, the next
sucks. It really, really sucks. But at the same time, like, they have to get over it as quickly as possible. And I think these players are all going to be so keen to just get back on the pitch and put it right. And having a test like City, you know, I think they'll have Nick Pope back. They'll have hopefully a lot more defensive solidity than what they had against United. But I think they'll have learned from what they experienced when they played in that cup final as well, because I think United did really well in terms of understanding what Newcastle was presenting as a threat and kind of mitigating it by maybe dropping off a little bit deeper, you know, frustrating Newcastle in terms of trying to get through the midfield, trying to get that service up forward. And I think they caused Eddie Howe a lot of problems by the changes that they made at halftime as well, in terms of where does it come through? Is Isaac that came on and went a bit higher? Like, how are we getting the service to him? You know, Shaw was having to come in and connect to the midfield, but he wasn't being able to get through the midfield, and there was no pivot really. You know, so it looked as though they were really, really frustrated. So I'm interested to see what kind of lessons Pep's going to take from that game as well, and how he tweaks his approach.
And look, any Newcastle fan, Jules, at the beginning of the season would have said top 10, we'd absolutely take it. But when you've been right in the mix for Champions League football, kind of 5th, 6th, 7th feels like 2nd, 3rd, 4th prize, doesn't it?
It will be. I think their title race really is that top 4 finish now. For them, it would be amazing in their progression as a club, and for Eddie Howe as a manager with that squad of players to get there. Of course, I still think that a top 6 finish will still be a good season for them, with the cup final as well on top of it, or alongside it.